Yes, yes, I have your picture.
Okay, then.
Uh,
Thank you very much.
I'm happy to introduce you to the audience. Uh, Everything is ready. Please start your presentation.
Okay, then. Thank you very much, and apologies for the technology mix-up. My name's Henry Abanda. I'm a reader and associate professor in construction informatics in the School of the Built Environment, Oxford Brookes University. My presentation will be about the development of a digital adoption plan for construction companies. This work or this PowerPoint has been prepared by my student Majid Abdel Tawab, who is a student on our MSc BIM and Management. So I've worked with him together for this session. Just for a rundown, I will provide a context and then the aim and objectives, and then the methods, and then the results and discussion conclusions, and I'll end by identifying some resources that are important for this presentation. And in case I'm a bit faster, please just drop a message for me to slow down. Yeah, in my role as a reader or as an associate professor in Oxford Brookes University, I've had to give lectures in other universities out and within the UK, and also to construction companies. Now, one of the questions that they usually ask me is after my session or after my BIM workshops with students or professionals, the key question they usually ask me, yes, Henry, BIM is actually important. It's good. You've actually demonstrated the potential of BIM to us. How do we set up a BIM department? And some of my students, when they go to companies, the first thing that they ask them, especially companies that have never adopted BIM, that know about BIM, they always ask students to set up a BIM department. So they've often come back to me to say, can you help us with setting my BIM department? So that is the premise. Now, some of my works in the past that have actually grounded this is actually developing a business case for BIM as a whole. By business case, I mean a compelling case to be able to convince companies as to why they should invest in BIM. That is the starting point. I won't go into defining BIM because Professor Fazat in the previous presentation did elaborate on that. He did touch a lot about BIM and digital technologies. So, but I guess this conference is about BIM, so it will be a waste of time for me to start defining BIM. But what I just want to draw from these two slides, from these two publications, is that I started this workshop by first of all developing business cases for BIM, trying to provide a justification, a rationale why companies should actually develop BIM, adopt BIM. So the aim of this workshop will be to enhance those participating at the moment on is to enhance their skills for them to be able to set up a BIM department, especially in a COVID era or post-COVID, where companies may be looking into optimizing or maximizing profit margin lines. And with regards to that aim, I will propose just a schematic a diagram on how to go about this. And of course, my second objective will be to detail hone down into what actually goes into a digital adoption plan. Well, I'm using digital here, BIM interchangeably, but digital is more encompassing. So whenever you hear BIM or digital adoption plan, just know that I'm talking about all the information technologies that we use in managing construction information in practice. And my third objective will be to propose an economic appraisal. If I demonstrate on how to develop this digital adoption plan, I should be able to conduct a study that says whether the digital adoption plan is actually feasible or viable. So that will be done using an economic appraisal method. Now, in a nutshell, this is the whole process, what you have to think in order to set up a BIM department. You have, as a company, you have to reflect on the kind of projects that you are involved in. Then you have to think about the kind of procurement that usually adopt with the clients or with the different stakeholders, or for the kind of projects you have to think about the procurement. And then, of course, the project life cycle that you're going to adopt, the kind of project life cycle. And the fourth step is a strategic planning tool. You need to have a strategic plan in place. And then the fifth step is the resource identification. And of course, the last one is economic appraisal. I will just pick one after another to provide a bit more flesh. Now, when I talk about projects, when you think about construction projects, you have buildings, you may have bridges, you may have roads, heavy construction, and even infrastructure. Now, depending on the type of project that you're involved in, obviously the digital technologies that are needed are different. For example, the different software that is required for designing a bridge are slightly different from the software required for designing buildings. So you have to think about the kind of projects that you are often involved in, because at the end of the day, you want to be able to identify software that can meet your needs without costing huge sums of money. Design and build, and I'm now on procurement. We have to think about the kind of procurement that we usually use as a company. And I've just picked design and build, where all the the owner typically hires a single entity to perform both design and construction under a single contract. So everything is done in-house. Then we have design, bid, and build, which is the traditional procurement methods, where the owner hires a designer and contractor separately. Now, I'm not going to elaborate or talk about all the different types of procurement, but using these two, I just want to draw your attention to the fact that if you are dealing with design, bid, and build, that means you have to think about interoperability, the communication between the different software systems. For example, one of the designer can design in a software that a contractor may not be able to use. And now you also have to think about what Fazad presented. He actually mentioned something in Persia, but I guess he was talking about IFC. So we have to think about our different stakeholders or those in the supply chain, and the kind of procurement that we're involved in can actually help us to understand those in our supply chain. And that can also help us to be able to choose the type of technologies. Whereas in the previous one, design and build, if everything is being done in-house, we still strongly encourage interoperability, but you don't really think about interfacing with those out of your supply chain. So procurement is actually important. It's an important parameter to consider. So as I've said, knowing your supply chain is important, as it can lead to savings in the kind of software that you've chosen. And of course, it fosters collaboration and limits the choices of redundant and duplicated software. Now, I've mentioned the project life cycle here. Now, these are different project life cycles that do exist in the literature. There's so many different types. And these are those in the UK. We have the Association for Project Management, they have their own project lifecycle definition. Then you have the CLOB1. Then you have the Office of Government Comments. You have the British Standards. We have the British Property Federation. And then we have the Royal Institute of British Architects, which is the most widely used in the UK. I mean, the one on the extreme right. And that one actually is now outdated. There's a recent rebate plan of work that the stages have actually changed from A, B, C to 0, 1 up to 7. Now, we'll see later on why the project life cycle is important. Now, to help us focus here, remember, we want to identify what goes into our digital adoption plan, what goes into it. Now, if you think about a project, you have to think about the different activities that go into into achieving a project or executing a project. And a more systematic way is to think about the different phases. So if you have phase A, which is appraisal, you can actually list the different activities in phase A. And so my third column, which is description of key tasks, are traditional tasks, what we should be able to do in practice, irrespective whether we have digital technologies or not. Is my pace okay? Somebody can just type if my pace is okay, if I need to slow down.
All right. I will.
Okay. I imagine that my pace is okay.
Questions.
Now, thank you. Now,
thank you.
When we talk about design and brief, we have to think about the different activities that go into design and brief. Concept, the different activities. Design development, the different activities. So in each phase, we have to list the different activities. Now, once we list those activities, we now identify core BIM activities. That's my third column. For us to be able to develop a digital adoption plan or a BIM adoption plan, we need to be able to know the activities that require BIM in a construction project. And this one is one of the BIM overlays that was developed by somebody, by one of the professionals who works for, I think, National Building Specification that I've just picked and put here. Now, once we now have these core BIM activities, as experts, we need to be able to identify the software, the different software that can help in achieving those BIM activities. Okay. Now, once we've identified the different software, we have to think about the different hardware that can actually host the software. Okay. Now, we may also have some peripheral devices that have to go with the different software I've chosen. For example, our mobile phones, our smart devices. You can't talk about BIM today without thinking about the smart devices that can actually help us to share information. And in between here, there should be another box, which I inadvertently skipped. There should be another box talking about the personnel, those who are able to use the software, the different software. And then if you identify the personnel, some of them definitely need training. Okay. Now, you may have to recruit new staff or train in-house, those that can be trained. And then you also have to determine the cash, the salary of those that you have to train or those that you have to recruit. Well, of course, this cash, I would also have to put their costs. And this cost is another column for the cost of the software and hardware and the devices. Now, remember, in my previous slide, I've identified the core BIM activities and then highlighted high-level resources that is needed for these activities. But given that this might be something that an individual may do, okay, it is systematic, no doubt. There are chances that we may forget certain activities. And that is where we have to think about using a strategic planning tool. And one of the, you have here, different strategic planning tool. I'm only going to focus on this, SWOT, which is strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now, what is the use of SWOT in this case? We have been able to list our BIM activities using from our project life cycle. We can now use SWOT to bring in the different company staff to have a brainstorming, those who are experts or those who may not necessarily be expert but are involved in decision making, to further identify what is needed as a way of technological enhancement of their business activities. We have already done this with project lifecycle, with a project lifecycle, or identify some of these activities through project lifecycle, and identify the different resources using through the project lifecycle. Now we can use our SWOT to further identify more. And what we usually do is, if you see something here like S1, it means strength 1, O2, it means, O1, opportunities. Okay, we identify areas where we can actually reinforce with digital technologies. And SWOT can actually help us, especially if it is through a brainstorming session. So that is why I titled this slide Integration of Strategic Planning and Project Lifecycle. Now, I'm not going to be reading all of this, but these are the details of what we have in this table. So if we go into this table, we've identified our activities, we identify areas where SWOT can actually contribute. We can now list the different SWOT components here. Okay. For example, if I take one weakness here, W2, I'm saying that the company is working without a common data environment and located between level 0 and 1, for example, on a BIM maturity diagram. Now, indirectly, I'm saying that if I were to propose a solution to this company, then they have to consider a particular type of common data environment that can be used in managing their construction information. Then we have opportunities there. Okay. Then we have threats. Now, as I've said, using the project life cycle and then plus SWOT allows us to enrich our information, and in a way, we self-validate the kind of information, the kind of BIM activities that is involved in our projects and the different technologies. By technology, I mean software, hardware, the peripheral devices or related devices, and then the personnel that is required in order to be able to use those technologies, and then the cost, the related cost. Now, in order to identify the different software, as I've said, the idea about having a digital adoption plan was raised to me in one of my workshops in 2015, and where companies really needed, the companies that we trained in the workshop, they really needed a way of identifying which of the software to use in practice, actually. So I wrote this paper in 2015, which is a critical appraisal of BIM systems, and I reviewed 122 BIM systems. The whole idea there was to show the interoperability between different software systems, because if you are choosing a software for a project, you have to think about a software that is BIM compliant. By BIM compliant, I'm saying a software that can read IFC and generate IFC, to say the least. So that article can actually serve as a basis for professionals to be able to choose the different software in their project. Now, after we've used our SWOT, we'll now come out with a table like that. I'm just showing brief parts. It's not the complete stuff here. Now, we can have a section where we'll have our activities here, and then we'll have the different software required here, and then we'll identify those who are to use it. Okay. Then I have this nice table that helps me to recapitulate everything. I have the personnel here, which I've identified based on the different activities. You have a BIM manager, you have an information manager, BIM lead, BIM detailer, quantity surveyor. Then you have the hardwares, which is there. We have the software. And of course, based on this personnel that we require, remember, this one is not those that are in the company. These are those that we require. Now, we may decide to provide training to some of them. Maybe there are some professionals within the company that already have a certain level of BIM, so they may need to enhance their capacities. So we have a section for training here. Then, of course, we have existing software systems, so we may need to migrate existing data. Okay, for example, their drawings might have been in computer-aided design system, so they may want to migrate into BIM software system. And they may also even need a BIM consultant to help them in their process. Now, when you think about each of this, you can actually approximate the quantities and then the units, price. Now, when I think about a BIM manager here, I have to think about the unit price, maybe a yearly salary. How much is it? Then I divide that by 12 to have a monthly salary. Okay, so this, I'm just like trying to highlight the kind of cost that we do that can be considered in this process. Then the hardware, we may have things like laptops. We say 42 laptops, something like that. And each laptop is about 210 pounds. That's very, very cheap though. It should be higher. But I'm just putting an approximate price there. Once we do that, we may use that data, the data from the previous slide, to, in any economic model, we're going to use that to get our total. Let me see where our total is. Yeah, we should be able to total all of this. Okay. Now, when we total all of this, we should use any economic model. Okay. By economic model, it could be return on investment. We also have break-even point. Okay. And NPV, net present value, all those type of economic models could use that. But then I've chosen this one. The reason I've chosen this is because that is what Autodesk has actually published on its site, not recommended. Autodesk has actually published this formula for return of BIM's return on investment. It is an article. If you type, there's an open source. And it actually states this. A is the cost of hardware and software in dollars. Of course, you can change it to pounds or to whatever currency you want. B is a monthly labor cost. Of course, the labor cost here is the cost of those involved or in a company involved in a BIM compliant project. And then C is a training in months. You might, in training your staff to be BIM proficient, definitely they have to take some months. It may not be months, it may be one day in a month, okay? And then you accumulate that over a period. So you can put that here. And then there's productivity loss during training, of course. If you are training your staff, it means in a day, if you are training your staff once a week, and it's supposed to be 5 working days a week, it means you are losing about 1 day a week, which is about 1 on 5, about 20%, for example. Now, but when you train that staff, and then the staff comes back, his or her productivity is going to increase. Although this productivity increase is not something that we get on the first day, he's going to gradually improve on that productivity. So this is a formula that we use. And of course, based on the slide before the previous one, when I submit all those values there, okay, I get this one as 119,000 pounds. That's 119,000 pounds. I've assumed a training of 3 months. This is just something I've chosen. It's not, there's no data from anywhere that has actually helped me to do that. And then this productivity loss, I've chosen 50%. You can choose anything, but the challenge here is we don't have statistics that tells us how to be able to calculate this. So it's just based on assumptions and experience. Productivity gain after training, I've chosen 25%. And then when I substitute that here, I have 36%. Okay? Which is, if you have a positive this, it tells you that it is worth investing in BIM. Okay? And you have to consider all what I've actually highlighted in the previous tables. Now, one of the questions you may be asking me is, how did you get those salaries or the wages or the cost of the different software? Okay, that's a big challenge. We do get that from vendors' website. If you go to vendors' website, you should be able to get cost of the different software. You can even go on Amazon to get a cost of some of the software and even hardware, the PCs. Then, for the salary of the workers, we know some of the standard wages. We just need to look at jobs being advertised. And then even the training, the cost of training, we need to look at what training providers, what they charge for, say, 5 days in Revit, for example. We can also make calls to be able to establish the values or the cost of software, hardware, and even the salary of some of these jobs. So this is not an exact science. These are just approximate values. Now, as I've said, a huge challenge is on how to determine your training time, how to determine the productivity loss during training, how to determine the productivity gain after training. But as I've said, there are various methods you can use in determining, maybe from a previous experience, or you simply say, well, if I have a staff who is working 5 days a week, and now he goes for a training, and then he's not working 5 days, working 3 days a week, then productivity loss, you are losing 2 days a week for that staff because you are paying that staff. So it's 2 on 5. So, and then if you multiply by 100, that becomes in percent, 100, that becomes in percentage. So these values, again, are approximate values. They're not exact. So to summarize it again, what actually goes into our BIM adoption plan is the different software is required, and those software depends on the kind of projects and kind of procurement route that we usually use. Similarly, if we have our software, the different software, we can go online and check the specification, which will allow us to identify the hardware capacities, things like RAM, CPU, RAM, hard drive, and stuff like that. That will allow us to identify the different hardware. And then once we have our hardware and our software, we can also think about the kind of devices or related devices. If I'm using, for example, if I've recommended something like BIM 360, which is a common data environment, okay, I should be able to find an app, a BIM 360 app in our phone. So we're thinking about using mobile phones as well to be able to access our models from BIM 360. So we may need peripheral devices here. And we can also go as far as even thinking about other technologies, especially in the area of COVID. Okay, we can think about things like drones in capturing data depending on the kind of project. Okay, flying over and getting aerial data. So we may also have a column for that. But once we've had all of that, we now have to identify the different personnel that can use a different software. And then, of course, the hardware is obvious, the devices as well. Then we identify the training for the different personnel. And here again, training here can be, you may just decide that you're going to train 50% of our staff, because in some companies, your staff may be of the older generation who don't want to be trained. They may simply leave, and then that may give you an opportunity to recruit staff with BIM experiences straight away, with with master's or bachelor's degrees in BIM, in construction experience in BIM. You may recruit that. On the other hand, you may decide to train part of your staff in digital technologies, which means you have to put in a cost to that. And of course, you have to think about their salary. Of course, what goes into that training, and if you are recruiting new staff, how much you're going to pay them. And of course, there should be a table here for the cost of the software, of the different software and hardware. That one should be a separate table. Now, the sum of all of this will give you a value. And based on that value, you can use any economic model. It could be a break-even point. At what point do you, if a company were to invest using the amount I've computed, when will they recover their money? It could be a return on investment model like the previous one, or it could be net present value, stuff like that. Any of those economic models. So to conclude, in order to develop a BIM adoption plan, we need to think about the kind of procurement. We need to think about the project lifecycle that can help us to identify different BIM activities. Then we need to enhance our using a strategic planning tool. In this particular case, I've chosen SWOT. And of course, if you use SWOT, it's advisable that you use brainstorming techniques with company staff, expert and non-expert, in order to be able to really identify why you need certain resources. And then that will allow us to get a technology plus people, and then plus costs. And this cost here is cost of software, and then salary as well. Now, once you have that, you can now compute your economic model. You can now use your any economic model to determine what you want to determine. It could be, as I've said, net present value. It could be return on investment. It could be break-even point. And that is the end of my presentation. I hope I didn't go above the time. And I'm open to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for a great presentation. There are some questions I'm going to ask. First, in the beginning of your presentation, in the part of CDEs, you said that based on your experience, the interpretability is very significant in DBB projects or design build projects. But for design build or in-house projects, do you also suggest using IFC, or is it better to use closed code CDEs or formats based on your experience?
Okay. I would suggest that in whatever project, we should always use IFC. If we don't use IFC in DB or design and build, in a company, that means we are likely going to be moving around with our hard disk or with our memory stick, taking one project from one computer to another. I mean, the distance is short, but that is not really recommended. We don't want to be going that way. We really want to be able to send our files through our common data environment or through email, so they can download it on whatever software. If I send you apps, you should be able to do that. So I'm not a kind of recommending, but I just want to draw your attention that depending on the procurement type, different stakeholders and different players come into play. and interoperability is actually key in some cases.
So you think this, using IFC in every possible scenario is the best idea?
Yeah, it's the
Uh,
best idea. That's the industry standard. It's the best idea.
there were formula for return of investment provided by Autodesk in another slide.
Yeah.
Uh, there's also a question about productivity gain after training. How would you estimate the productivity gain after training in percentage when there is nothing already started? I mean, is there any average ratio or something that we can use to explain the clients the benefits of using BIM before starting everything?
Uh, Again, I would say this one depends on experience, and even that productivity gain there to me is not a constant. Okay, if you think about integration, it's something that fluctuates because when you learn the software, when you go and then you pay and then you learn the software, you've understood it. You don't become an expert that same day. When you come,
Yes.
you improve bit by bit. With time, you become an expert. But that same week, your productivity maybe is at 20%. By the time you go use the same knowledge that you've learned on different projects, you become an expert where productivity gain maybe 70%. Now, or even 80. Now, let me tell you productivity gain. I come originally from Cameroon and I did
Yes.
civil engineering in my master's, and I used to do structural design and analysis with the hand. So a 10-story building, it used to take me 3 months to do the structural design because it was manual. Okay. And then there will still be errors. Then I came to the UK to do a PhD. I was in Salford and I use what we call robo structures. At the time, it was
Yes.
called, yeah, robo structures. Now, if you
Robot
give me
structure.
that, yeah, if you give me the same drawings, if you give me the same 10-story building, I took a 10-story building that I did on my master's, and then I used robo structures, and I did design analysis within a week. So in that case, my productivity gain is a week, okay, divided by 3 months. You now see that I spent a shorter time. Sorry, not you can see the difference is 3 months minus that divided by 3 months. Okay. Now, somebody who goes and does a training who used to use something like AutoCAD, which is not a BIM software, to just do design, I'm just talking about design, normally having our 3D model, to use AutoCAD to get the drawings. Then he goes and does a Revit training, for example. When he comes back, okay, he's able to produce the same drawing in a shorter time. Can help that one can help you to for productivity. Another one is if you are using a mobile phone and your CD, like as you mentioned, now without a mobile phone and without a CDE, you have to go to the site so many times to go and see your project, to go and see the evolution. But if you have a mobile phone with some of this app, somebody who's on site can be sending you evolution of the project, getting snapshots and sending it to you.
Live
That can
reports.
reduce the number of times that you go to site. And you can approximately estimate that, yeah, you used to go 10 times to a site, but now you're only going 5 times. That's a productivity gain of about how many? 50%.
So the estimation is different for every project, but it is always positive in any kind of project.
It is, well, it is different from any kind of project, but what we need now is to be able to collect data. If I were a company person, if I were to advise professionals, is we need this kind of productivity data. Okay, we need to collect it, but obviously it's going to be different from different kind of projects. Now, to say that is it always going to be positive? It is positive if you use the tools the right way. Okay. If you are not proficient in using the tools, then it's not going to be positive. You're going to waste more time. And that is
Yes.
why you have to be trained. Okay. One of the, let me take one classic case. I met somebody in one of my BIM workshop. There was a company that invested in BIM. Okay. They wanted to set up a BIM department. They bought Revit, bought ArchiCAD, bought Naviswork, bought Synchro. Now, when you look at somebody buying Naviswork and Synchro and then
At the
buying
same
Revit
time.
and ArchiCAD, they're similar thing. Okay, he's invested too much in it. If you were to calculate that, okay, calculate the cost of the different software that that individual has bought, he has actually wasted more money. Now, if I were to compare that with an ideal situation, he will be negative. But to him, he is not negative, he is positive in a way. But if I were to advise that professional, comparing what he has invested with an ideal situation, he will be negative. So it's supposed to be positive if he use the tools and he make reasonable choices.
I understand.
Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation. And if you don't have anything more to say, I think it's fine, final.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I don't have anything to say.
Thank you.
Yeah. Am I the last presenter for today?
I think there will be a break after your presentation, and then there will be another round.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay.
You can turn
Bye.
off your camera. Thank you and
Okay.
goodbye.
Okay. Bye.